Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Chronos Sustainability webinar on our new guide to careers in sustainable finance. Today's webinar is being assisted by Laura Cooper. My name is Nicky Amos. I'm the Managing Director of Chronos, and I am your chair for today. So Laura, if we could move to the next slide, please. I'd like to start by welcoming our speakers for today. So we have Dr. Rory Sullivan, Chief Executive of Chronos, who will give highlights from the guide today. And we have our wonderful panel of speakers, Aisling Eyres from Chronos Sustainability, Olga Hancock from the Church Commissioners for England, Piers Hugh Smith from Franklin Templeton, and Robert Black from Chronos. So during the Q&A session, which will follow Rory's highlight session, the panel will be invited to respond to your questions. And if you could please use the question box in the top of your dashboard on your screen to the top right. It's the box with a question mark in it. Please type your answers in and we will try to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. Any that we can't answer, then we will follow up with you after the session. Okay, so please note that this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the link to the recording will be available after the session. Next slide, please, Laura. So what was the inspiration behind the guide? At Chronos, we're regularly asked by students and by early career financial and sustainability professionals about how they might build a career in sustainable finance. And we tend to get asked the same questions. Is sustainable finance the right career for me? What qualifications, skills, and attributes are needed to work in sustainable finance? And how can I get started on this career pathway? The guide aims to answer some of those questions and will provide some practical insights from professionals working within the sustainable finance sector on both their careers and also what they're looking for from recruiting into the sector. So I would like to first start by thanking the researchers to this guide, Robin Goon, Natalie Halstead, Anna Hatton, Claire Sullivan and Laura Sullivan, and our research advisor, Dr. Richard Perkins from the Department of Geography and Environment at the London School of Economics, who supported with the research design and with the training on the interview methods and techniques. And we must also, of course, thank the many contributors to the guide who are professionals working in a range of sustainable finance roles who have provided valuable insights and contributions, and a complete list of the organisations and individuals appears towards the back of the guide. So next slide, please. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Rory, who will give an overview of the guide and provide his view on the key highlights. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you very much, Nicky. So the guide is structured around 8 themes or areas as set out on the slide on your screen. I just want to offer 2 reflections on this. The first is that there are a whole range of organizations where people work in and on sustainable finance, not just financial institutions like investment managers, pension funds, banks, insurance companies, but also in a whole range of service industries that have developed to support these. So consulting firms, legal firms, communications consultancies and industry bodies and networks. And you will see from the slide Nicky presented previously that we have sought views and opinions from a range of those organizations. One point that came out from the interviews, because we interviewed people about their careers and how they've evolved in the industry, has been that people have tended to move around. They've moved from consulting to investment, back to communications, etc. So one of the features of careers in this industry is that people have tended to move, and that the skills you learn in one segment of the industry are quite often transferable or recognized as useful in others. This is particularly relevant to those of you who are looking to start off in a career in sustainable finance. It often doesn't really matter where you start. It's really about building experience and developing skills and knowledge that you can then take with you. And I think a point that we may discuss in the discussion is also the value of getting started in your career, even if it's not exactly in sustainable finance, because a lot of people have moved into the field over time. The second sort of theme that came out, which actually surprised us and wasn't exactly something we expected to cover in the guide, was the question of, is sustainable finance the right career for you? On many levels, it looks really attractive. It's a high profile sector. There are very rewarding jobs. It's a chance to make a real difference. But something that came across from many of the interviewees was also that it's a very demanding career, both in terms of the work you're expected to do, in terms of the responsibility you carry, in terms of that sort of personal responsibility and personal motivation that people bring to it. I I I, I think everybody we interviewed said that there isn't anywhere else they would want to work or any other field they would prefer to work in. But they all said that to enjoy and make the most of it, you also need to understand the demands and be prepared for those both at the beginning of your career and as you move through your career. Next slide, please, Laura. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about um, the findings in the guide, because I think actually the more valuable part of today's session is going to be the panel discussion. But I did want to offer just one or two other wider themes. The first is, when job hunting, increasingly the core entry requirement, or the minimum expectation, it relates to quantitative skills, particularly at graduate entry roles. Increasingly, recruiters are saying you must have strong, be it Excel skills or big data skills or database skills. So to get in the door, being able to demonstrate your capability in those quantitative research analytical areas is an essential requirement. And if that's not part of your degree or postgraduate qualification, then you need to consider developing some skills in those areas and being able to demonstrate your capability. That said, I think almost everybody we interviewed said that's how you get in the door. And of course, much of your day-to-day work focuses on quantitative analysis, at least in the early stages. But everybody we spoke to said actually the key skills relate to communication and persuasion. So often you're trying to convince skeptical audiences to do something they don't want to do, be that to convince a fund manager that he or she should invest in a particular green stock, convincing a company that they should improve their practices, perhaps when the business case for action isn't that strong, perhaps convincing your organization that they need to develop policies on human rights or modern slavery or whatever the topic may be. So I think for to I say to get into the industry, it's the quantitative skills are almost like the threshold requirement to be successful in this industry. It's the interpersonal skills, communication skills, writing skills that are key. Um, I think the other point that many of those who interview graduates said is that they need people to both be passionate about sustainability and finance, and to be able to demonstrate that interest. So the lots of people working in are looking to work in finance. My experience has been that they care about the environment, they don't care about finance. And I think it's really important to highlight that if you want to work in this industry, you must understand its importance to society, why it's important investors have duties to their clients and beneficiaries, and where sustainability fits into that, and be passionate about the two working together. This is not a dichotomy or an either or. People who work in this field need to be interested in and passionate about both. And the last point that came out from the guide, and I think is a question we always get asked, is how do I get experience? Now, it's tough. There aren't that many internships or placements. What we have seen has been the people we look at and are interested in are people who've got interesting experience. So they may have experience in, I don't know, working in the accounting department or the pensions department of their company, or they have done extra qualifications. There are a whole range of courses on sustainable finance you can do online. There's a lot of course you can do on things like Excel and big data and so forth. Um, and those of you doing undergrad or postgrad courses can, of course, do dissertations on some aspect of sustainable finance. It is really obvious when people come to us and they think this is a nice place to work, not or a nice field to work in, and just haven't invested in it. We can see through that. People who want to work in this industry and want to get in the door bluntly need to demonstrate their passion and demonstrate their willingness to learn about the field. Without that, there are lots of other people who want to work in this field and have done that, and you're at a disadvantage. But enough of being inspiring and cheery. I actually now want to turn to our panel. So next slide, please, Laura. Um, so we have four panelists today. They cover a range of backgrounds, so both academic backgrounds and professional backgrounds, and are at different stages in their career and work in different geographies. And what I'm hoping is that over the next sort of 30 or 40 minutes, that in discussion we'll be able to explore the different dimensions of sustainable finance careers. Um, and they have quite different perspectives, so don't be surprised if they disagree in terms of the advice they give or the opinions they bring. This is a diverse area. There are different opportunities for people, and there are different places people can occupy. And I hope that what we'll give is a sense of that breadth of opportunity and also some of the practical things you can do to get started. So, so before I turn to the panel, can I stress, if you have questions, please put your questions in the box with a question mark on it. And we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible during the next half an hour, 40 minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn to the panelists. I'm going to basically do it in the order in which people are appearing on my screen. And I'd like to ask each of the panelists two questions. One, can you give a brief overview of your role, your current role? And secondly, can you describe your career? How did you get into sustainable finance, and maybe what steps you've taken along that way? I'm going to start with Olga Hancock from the Church Commissioners. So over to you, Olga, please.
Thanks, Rory, and thank you. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel today, and I'm so excited that there's such enthusiasm for this area, which is a huge turnaround from when I started almost over 2 decades ago. So my current role, I lead the responsible investment team of the Church Commissioners for England. The Church Commissioners is the endowment of the Church of England. It's worth around about £10 billion. It's a closed fund, and we have a very diversified portfolio from direct ownership of real assets and forestry to private equity and VC. So the challenge I have with the team is how do we integrate ESG across all those asset classes. We focus on addressing risk around climate change, social inequality and biodiversity. In addition to that, I also lead on several key external initiatives. The reason we join up with a lot of external initiatives is to collaborate with other investors in the field, but also to engage on policy, because we see this as really critical to addressing some of the systemic risk we've identified in our portfolio. So I chair the UK SIF Policy Committee, co-lead the policy workstream of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and also co-chair the Investor Policy Dialogue on Deforestation. So that's my current role. Should I jump to how I got
How did you get here, Olga?
How did I get here? This is a very roundabout route, not with
Yeah.
spreadsheets and data analysis. That is not my forte. Hopefully I've got some minimal numeracy skills, but no, spreadsheets aren't my forte. So I started, as I said, over 2 decades ago in law, in environmental law with a geography and legal background. Which there weren't even many jobs open at the time. I was in big law firms. I worked for a little while in local government, and then later on went into human rights law as well. And then about 5 years ago, I could see a real shift in the dynamic at the law firm I was working at, actually, where a lot of these issues around human rights and environment were moving into not just the corporate clients and the corporate sector, but the asset management sector, and sustainable finance was really starting to take off. So I'd been in the role I was in for about 8 years. So I was looking at what to do next, and it seemed the obvious choice to move into sustainable finance. So I carried across the skill sets around environmental and human rights law, but had to very quickly get up to speed on finance. I'm still learning. It's always a learning process, and undertook the IMC. So I initially went in as a senior engagement analyst, primarily engaging with listed equities in our portfolio, and last year was appointed head of responsible investment.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. And Olga, can I just ask, so when you went into sustainable finance, did you go in as a human, I mean, I know you went into engagement, but as a human rights person, was it your specialism that managed to, that you used to get the role?
Yeah, I mean, there was a real synergy around some of the underlying skill sets. So when I initially came in, one of the first things I did was design a human rights policy and work with my peers at the Church of England Pensions Board on that. and CTLA Asset Management to design a human rights policy which we could implement with investee companies, but also a lot of engagements, say with extractives companies have an underlying foundation on human rights, in particular the UN Guiding Principles on Business Human Rights and the right to free, prior, informed consent in particular. So that was particularly helpful. But also having advised a lot of companies on environmental law was very helpful as well, because I'd had that proximity to the companies and those issues.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. So I might move on to Robert Black, the head of responsible investment at Chronos. Rob, how did you get here?
How did I get here? So,
Yeah.
um,
And
yeah,
maybe also an overview of your role at Chronos. Thank you.
right. We'll start with a quick overview then. So, as Rory said, I'm the head of responsible investment at Chronos Sustainability. And Chronos is a sustainability consultancy. We work across a number of different areas, including biodiversity, food, health, and one of those areas is responsible investment. So, my core day-to-day responsibilities is looking at all of the varied projects we do at a consultancy on responsible investment, and that's primarily alongside Rory, our CEO, and a team of research analysts, including Ash, who's on the call here. And then our projects, I think they change all the time. This is an area that's always changing, but we can kind of broadly categorize them into three areas. One is where we work directly with investors, so that's helping them with their policy development, with their strategy, with their implementation on kind of the range of ESG issues. We then also work with those organizations that support the investment industry. So they could be kind of membership organizations, they might be research organizations, and that's around producing the kind of information and tools that help investors to implement ESG topics and the sustainability topics. And then our kind of third category is more at kind of a national level. So we work with a number of national regulators on sustainability policy frameworks and how to kind of implement sustainability across the range of companies that fall under their jurisdiction. And then also at Chronos, we think of responsible investment as that topic area in of itself, but also as an area of expertise that we can apply in different places. So we quite often will take non-financial companies or a separate topic and think about how we can leverage the finance industry to kind of create more impact in some of those different areas. And then my career path it's been a little bit varied as well. So I had started with a master's in sustainable development and kind of imagined a career in sustainable development to start with. But after a year or so of internships and exploring a few different opportunities, I actually just ended up in a much more traditional finance role as a securities finance broker. So that was a classic kind of investment bank, pure numbers role, no real consideration of ESG issues. And I spent a number of years doing that up until the point where the team that I was involved in was bought by the London Stock Exchange Group. And as I moved over to the London Stock Exchange Group, I became aware of FTSE Russell, who are another company within that group, and specifically the ESG team within FTSE Russell. And that was actually the first time that I'd come across sustainable finance as a thing that existed or as a potential for a career. So I spent probably about a year speaking to the team, getting to know what they did, and then eventually being able to take up an opportunity that the team had. And that was my entry point into sustainable finance, and since there I've stayed. And it was a great opportunity for getting started, because it was all about what sort of data the sustainable finance industry needs, how it's collected, how it's processed, and how investors use it. So it's really a very serendipitous but useful grounding for a career in sustainable finance.
Excellent, thank you, Rob. And I might segue straight to Eyres, or Ash. Ash, would you like to describe both who's in the Chronos Sustainability Responsible Investment team? Ash, would you like to describe your role and also how you managed to get a job with Chronos?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Ash. I'm currently a research analyst at Chronos Sustainability in the responsible investment team with Rob as my manager. So in my role, I do a whole lot of varied things, but mainly the crux of it is research, analysis, writing, all of which support client projects. So just to give you a salient example, currently working on a human rights project. So we're looking at assisting an asset owner who wants to kind of review their approach to human rights and build a better understanding of human rights, not only within the organization, but kind of think more strategically about where they could focus on and where there is particular value in them taking action. And I find this quite interesting because it really plays into the context, the bigger context around human rights, and the growing number of legislation and regulations that are coming out, hopefully with the CS D in Europe. So that's on the one hand, and then I also support a range of projects in the biodiversity and nature team. Um, Also doing kind of a range of research, writing, analysis, which feeds into the client projects, and also supporting Chronos with their global animal welfare benchmark and CCLA mental health benchmark. So at this very early stage, my role is varied, which I really enjoy, and I get to dip my toes into a whole range of different projects, which cut across a number of themes, all of which intersect to a certain degree. But I wouldn't say I'm a specialist at any one topic yet. And in terms of how I got to this point, so I do not come from a finance or business background, that's for sure. My background is in policy and IR, so I did an undergraduate in international relations and Chinese, and then my master's was in environmental policy at LSE. I've always known I've wanted to pursue a career in climate change. It's always more interested in how climate change intersects with issues of justice and equity, and effectively how we can address climate change and biodiversity loss in a way that accounts for these inequities. But then through my masters, I became more interested in the role that the financial system can have in helping address these issues, if capital is channeled in the right way. I'm certainly not saying finance is the one and only answer. Don't get me wrong. It's also contributed to a lot of the issues we're now facing, but it's certainly not going to go away. And I think there's significant potential to leverage the financial system, to foster more social and environmental outcomes. Obviously, this is a constantly evolving space, but I think that realization that it's not going to go away, and there is great good coming out of it, and how can we optimize the structures that we have. That's a little rundown.
Excellent, thank you, Ash. And lastly, if I could go to Piers Hugh Smith from Franklin Templeton. So Piers, if you could also describe your role and also how you got started, and I guess have now moved through sustainable finance from London to the west coast of the US.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rory. So, yeah, my role is I'm the global head of stewardship at Franklin Templeton. Franklin Templeton, not a huge name in Europe, but relatively large investor. We manage about 1.6 trillion across 19 different investment teams across pretty much every asset class. I think we do everything now from fixed income and equity to blockchain driven funds, and we've just recently launched a Bitcoin product as well. So we're really the kind of point of mentioning all of that is that it's a really big, complicated financial institution that's very, very diffuse. And I actually came before from a company called CCLA, which Olga Hancock mentioned, which was a very mission-focused investor. So I've kind of had the privilege to see kind of both sides of the coin here. But really my role is engagement and voting. I do stewardship, so really what we do as owners of the companies in which we invest. And a lot of it is focused on public company board engagement in the US, and also making sure that all of our 19 different investment teams can vote all of their shares in a way that is going to achieve the best outcome for our client, to drive the most change and be the most effective. And in total, that means that we vote around 11,000 meetings a year. So a big part of this role is operations, and a big part of this role is research and engagement, and kind of building relationships both with the investors that we work with internally, but also the company boards that we dialogue with externally. And so I got here, my sort of academic background, I have undergrad in business economics and behavioral finance. And actually what I was always really interested in wasn't specifically sustainability in and of itself, but I was really interested in systematic failure, or when big groups didn't act in their own best interest. And so many kind of peak sustainability issues are systemic ones, climate change being the most obvious example. So I was really interested in working in development economics and public policy. I wanted to go work for the UN, but they weren't hiring any British people at the time. And so I ended up getting a career in the mining sector, which seems like an odd place for someone with an interest in sustainability. But it was about the time that the World Bank was coming out with a lot of research suggesting that the metals and minerals, the net zero economy was going to be more metals and minerals intensive than the current one rather than less. So again, that was a really good example of how you had something that was traditionally not liked or didn't fit with maybe what you might consider to be sustainable, but there was absolutely no getting away from it, that it was going to have to be there. So it was a good example of a problem, and that really evolves that job over time. It ended up joining a spin-off startup from that company, which was focused on forestry and building, buying up disused farmland to plant fast-growing timber to create cross-laminated timber housing in Asia Pacific. And in the end, I actually left that startup over a governance issue. So that was my introduction into the world of corporate governance, and I was very fortunate from there to be able to join an investment manager looking at corporate governance and thinking about the role of investors in kind of productive and well-functioning capital markets. And one of, I think, the big differences at a manager like Franklin is we cover so many different clients and so many different geographies. We don't have a clear mission as an organization because we represent over 1 million clients in 42 countries. There's no clear thesis between them, apart from what we're legally charged to do, which is to protect and grow their assets. But given how diffusely we're invested, we're very exposed to how productive the system is. So even though we don't have this mission, sustainability is still fundamentally important to how we can be successful. But we have to think about it from much more the perspective of how does sustainability contribute to an effective capital market system, rather than how can we use finance to contribute to sustainability. So it's a slightly different way of approaching it, and that's featured in a lot of the ways that we work, but it's an important complement to the work that's really done by mission-driven organizations pushing the envelope, because that really moves the line forward. And I think where really the bigger organizations, the bigger financial institutions sit, is they're not maybe affecting the most glamorous change, but really moving huge sums of capital a little distance at a time, kind of in behind as the line is pushed forward. But I've gone well over my 3 minutes, so I'll yield back to you, Rory.
Thank you, Piers, and thank you, everybody. Before we, when people were registering for this webinar, we asked them if they had any questions they wanted to ask, and there are a couple of questions that virtually everybody asked, so I'd like to ask them to group. So the first one is, and Nicky, you may want to come in on this as well, because you've been involved in some of the Chronos recruitment as well, which is, I think it's for Nicky, Rob, Olga and Piers, which is, what do you look for when you're looking to recruit graduates, fresh graduates or early career professionals into your teams? Like what is the secret? What's the thing you really look for, or what's the thing that puts you off recruiting them? Not sure who wants to take that first.
Well, shall I start, as I haven't spoken yet on this? But so I think, the first thing to acknowledge is that this is a highly competitive area, and of course for every job there are going to be an awful lot of candidates. So what is it that we look for that really provides that standout? And I think for us there are a couple of areas. One is about shared purpose and values. Is the individual presenting as somebody who really does believe in the value of collaboration and working together to really deliver impact, which is very much at the heart of the Chronos sustainability mission. And the second is looking for proof points, really. I mean, just beware that, given that it is highly competitive, you can't greenwash your way into a career in sustainable finance. If you say that you're passionate and you care about sustainability, you really have to be able to demonstrate that. And, you know, with little or limited career experience, then we're looking for other points of evidence. So it could be your dissertation, it could be some volunteering that you have done, maybe for a charitable organisation or another voluntary organisation. So I think we're looking for examples of ways in which you have tried to make a difference and really demonstrated that you have an active interest in an aspect of sustainability. I'll leave it there and let others provide some insights.
Yep. Piers, Olga, Rob?
Yeah, I'll give a quick comment. I mean, frankly, when I joined the firm just over 2.5 years ago, we had a stewardship team of 1, which was me, and now it's 10. So we've done a fair bit of hiring, and I can share broadly what we've been looking for, and that's been spread out from people with 15 years experience down to about people with none, and through our graduate program as well. And there's really 3 things that we look for, and I think Nicky's point about showing evidence to them is really good. One of the things we did was actually remove the degree requirement. So we look for evidence irrespective of whether that's achieved through an undergraduate program or whether it's achieved through other life experience that kind of can still show those skills. So we're very evidence driven rather than sort of learning by rote. But the 3 kind of things that have to stand out in all the roles that we've hired is an ability to build positions. So that means having an ability to at least understand analysis, understand financial literacy. A lot of what we do is about taking sustainability items and understanding their interaction with more traditional financial investment management. So personally, one of the reasons I ended up here is because I'd be a terrible investment analyst. I don't have the numerical skills for it, but I can read it and broadly understand it. So you don't need to be a maths genius, but you do need to be somewhat literate with the way that the finance system works. Then the second kind of column of it is being able to present those positions that you've built. So that's people skills, collaborating skills, negotiation skills. Debating is often very good for this, but it's a very fine line between confrontation and collaboration, I think particularly in the engagement world where it's a bit of both. And then the last thing is really understanding the mechanics of the system that you're in. And you can evidence that in lots of different ways. You know, if you've had a background doing something where you've had to work with a lot of stakeholders, or you've had to bring people together, or you've had to work within a system, that's a really important skill, because between all 3 of those, it's very easy to show how you can understand or identify an issue, you can move it to a point where you can build consensus, and then you can work within the constraints that you have to try and get to something really effective. And so there's loads of different ways you can evidence that, but that at a very high level is what we were looking for in pretty much all of our roles, whether it's 10 years of experience or 1.
Olga or Rob?
I'll jump in. I'll let you go, Olga.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think there's, as everyone said, it's competitive. So we're going to be looking for all of those kind of core skills that are needed. And in consulting, that's, you know, things like being a good communicator, being able to research, analyze, you know, write, all of that sort of stuff. But lots of people can do that, and lots of people can demonstrate that they can do that. I think in sustainability, that it is a huge area. There's a massive number of topics, and you are expected to become an expert, or at least develop some expertise in all of those topics, or at least a wide range of them. And it's an area that's constantly changing. So I think you've got to show kind of an ability to apply lessons learned from different things onto new topics. So it's that kind of critical thinking, critical analysis that allows you to cover different topics kind of quickly and efficiently. And then I think slightly linked to that is there's never kind of one particular answer, and you're working with a diverse range of actors. You're working with investors, you're working with NGOs, you're working with individuals in society. So being able to consider different points of view and being able to accept perspectives that don't necessarily match with your own opinions and valuing those perspectives is really important, because that's how you start to have meaningful conversations and collaborate and deliver change.
And Olga, do you want to add anything on that? Or have we
I don't
covered
have
everything?
I mean, it's pretty much been all covered. I was thinking
Yeah.
of this, maybe you need to have started working 20 years ago for this wonderful character on Sex and the City, Charlotte. Do you remember Charlotte? And Charlotte ran an art gallery, and she was absolutely, when she went to hand it over to someone else when she left work, she had to make sure that they had a degree both in fine art and in finance. You had to be able to do both, and you could see she had the savvy on both, but the ability to mesh the two. And I think this is something similar. You need the sustainability savvy, whether your passion's human rights or climate change or environment, but also that financial literacy. So you can have one and then acquire the other, or the other way around. But critical to this role is the ability to synthesize that. So that's from the knowledge point of view. And then I think on the skill sets, yeah, critical thinking is key. You've got to be able to strip things apart and put them back together, and then have the soft skill sets to create a narrative to support your argument. Languages are fantastic. You know, we do a lot of international work, so having language skill sets it shows a curiosity, but also an ability to work across cultures and regions that's really helpful too.
Okay, good. Ash, can I ask you a question? So what's the most surprising thing about your job or that you just didn't predict you would need? And then I'm going to ask the others the same question. But I mean, you've come into this field presumably with a view about what it is. Has there been anything about it that's shocked you or surprised you, or you just didn't expect to find?
Um, Nothing's terribly shocked me, but what I will say is I think it's a reflection of just the landscape in general, is just the need to have an adaptability and proactiveness. I think even if you've been in the space for 30 years, the rate at which things are changing, the rate at which requirements are coming out, the rate at which legislation is coming out is forcing people who, you know, perhaps are considered experts in this space to think about how they go about their work and how they go about the project. You know, what we do now might be completely different in a few years. So I think that need to be proactive and adaptive, be able to adapt to different projects and tasks. It was kind of reinforced when I started at Chronos. You know, I think having spoken to many people, it's like, oh, we've got given this project, we have a vague understanding of what we need to do, but there are things we need to brush up on, there are skills we need to brush up on, there are things we need to read, and so it's not static. You know, the it's not like here's everything you need to know and you'll be able to do it for the next 20 years. This is the baseline, but rest assured you will have to brush up your knowledge and brush up your expertise constantly. And I think probably that is quite common across sectors, but I think particularly in sustainability, whether you be on the policy side or the finance side, I think it's the nature of how things are going, which, you know, it's a good thing, but it means you do really have to be on your A game.
Piers, I see you're nodding. Do you agree?
Yeah, a lot of that really resonated. I guess I think one of the other things that I would really encourage people to think about is a huge part of the integration of sustainability has been driven by regulation, and that's a really often good kind of vector that it enters an organization. But there is a real need for in what I would call the conventional investment decision making process for really pragmatic sustainability analysis and work. And I think it requires a lot more creativity to get it done there, and it's a little bit harder. A lot of places aren't doing it, not because they can't, but because they don't realize the opportunity. And so I would just really encourage people to be creative and not be afraid of pushing new ideas and being vocal about them. You know, people, I think, generally in finance are pretty good at tolerating dissenting views, and so I'd really encourage, you know, just thinking creatively. And if you see something that's not being done and you can't find a good reason why not, then suggesting you're either going to learn through feedback or you're going to get the credit for doing something new. So I just really encourage kind of looking at things from a fresh slate.
Good. Olga and Rob, I've got a different question for you, but and Piers, this may be also relevant to you. A lot of the questions we got prior to the webinar were about transferring into sustainable finance, having worked in a different field or discipline first, and people are kind of asking, what do I do to move across? Is it just apply for a job, or are there things I can do to maximize my chances of making that move? So I mean, you've both done that, and Piers, you have as well. I'm just interested, do you have any advice on that? Like, what had you done something that really enabled you, or when you recruit, are there things you look for in people to say, yes, he or she can make that leap across? I'm not sure. Olga, do you want to go first? Then Rob?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We recruit people from a wide range of areas. We've got somebody about to start from one of the big four firms who's been working as a sustainability consultant. We've had somebody who was in the team currently who was ex-military and then went into human rights, that way, and has now worked at the World Benchmarking Alliance and is now with us. We've had people come from membership organisations. So you can come into, say, working for an institutional investor from a whole range of different backgrounds. I think it's got to do with framing the transferability of the skill sets. So obviously all those skill sets are transferable, but in applying for the job, you have to be able to demonstrate exactly how transferable those skill sets are. I think also to have an awareness of where the skill sets might be lacking. So you might need to pick up the IMC or do a course on sustainable finance or an ESG investing certificate or something like that. So to really be able to map out where you've got the alignment of the skill sets and where you don't, and then to address those gaps you might have.
And Rob, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really great answer and covers a lot of what I would have said. I think also this is again, it's a changing industry. It's a rapidly maturing industry. People's roles are changing all the time. So if you're in a different type of role and this is an industry or an area you want to get into, it is really important to meet people and speak to people and ask them what they really do day to day. It's quite difficult to understand exactly what people are doing just by reading a job description or by looking at their job titles. All of the investors kind of invest and act in quite independent ways. The consultants do things differently. The research organizations do things differently. So that kind of going and meeting and really understanding what people do is going to help you work out whether what you've learned in previous roles is going to be transferable and how you're going to be able to articulate that in applications and in interviews.
Nicky or Piers, did either of you want to come in on that?
Sure, I can say something very quickly, which I guess I've sort of I went into sustainable finance and arguably back out of it into regular finance. So I wouldn't, when looking for a job, that sort of proof point of kind of showing that not only do you have that kind of base interest specifically in how sustainability works in the finance sector, but there's some sort of backing to that, whether it's a qualification or some writing. I think that's a great little proof point. But I also wouldn't be afraid of taking jobs that may not seem sustainable on the outside. You don't have to find a specific sustainable investment analyst job, because actually sustainability is quite an important part of regular investment analysis. My job, we actually took sustainability out the titles because we were trying to more closely integrate with our public markets function. And so actually now we do more work and probably make more change on sustainability than when we had our sustainability in the title. So there's a lot of ways where you can work in making finance and the world a more sustainable place without having to be boxed in so directly.
Yeah. And I think for me, just bear in mind that the pathway is rarely linear. It's more circular. There is a lot of change happening in the industry. It is a rapidly evolving industry. I think showing a willingness to adapt, learn, continue to, adjust to different surroundings, different needs and expectations of the sector is very important. And sometimes that means making a sideways move. If you are in a traditional finance role and you want to get into sustainable finance, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to strive for a promotion. Sometimes making a sideways move will actually put you in good stead to really learn the ropes and then be able to advance your career
Thank you,
beyond that.
Nicky. Okay. Another question that's come in is, a number of questions have revolved around this theme, is the changing nature of sustainable finance. So is it changing? I mean, thematically, or I don't know, concepts like degrowth coming in, or how does it need to evolve? Piers, I think you started by signaling it's not just about traditional sustainability or ESG, but I'm just interested in Piers' views in how, from your perspective, sustainable finance is changing. And does that have implications for the skills that people are going to need to navigate? Or is it the same skills, it's just the context you're deploying them in is going to be different? Olga, would you like to start? You can say no and I can move on to Ash.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I mean, it is changing rapidly. Even in the 5 years I've been in the area, there's been a really rapid change. There's obviously ebbs and flows, but the movement is only in one direction. There's a real dynamic going on in the field more broadly at the moment, and I think the field's had to grow up. So it's been fairly nascent for a long time, and people have run around and do all kinds of things. And then one side, we've now got the kind of anti-greenwashing piece coming in from the regulators. So things actually have to be done properly. We've got legislation in both the EU and the UK around that. So people can't just say whatever they want to. They've really got to be able to back that up with evidence now. And again, on the other side, we've got political issues in the US we have to be very conscious of. So everything we do now has to be done, well, it always was, but we have to be able to demonstrate how professionally it's been done, how thoroughly. We've got to be able to evidence decisions, etc. So I think it's good. It's really coming of age and turning into a proper profession, and things really have to be done thoroughly now.
Yeah, I think that's something that came through in in many of the entries we did for the guide, is that this is a field that is becoming more mainstream, and it's also having to professionalize. So the gifted amateur model of sustainable finance is no longer one that's going to succeed. Ash, you've looked at the industry for some time and before joining. I'm just interested in what you're seeing, or what you think is now happening even in the areas you've been working in.
Yeah, so I guess just kind of building on Olga's points, I'd say one thing which, even having spoken to clients that Chronos work with, is that people do care. And I think it's, I think we have this idea, I mean, I definitely had this idea that finance is money and that's all they care about. But, the reality of it is that things are evolving, and people within the organizations which are traditionally just associated with growth and money do care. It's just how do we, the struggle of how do you reconcile financial profit with also environmental and social goals. And it's a hard one, there's no doubt about it. But I think the fact that when we have these very candid conversations with people, whether it be with an asset owner, an asset manager, is the overwhelming feeling I get is that people do care. It's just how do we implement those beliefs both within the organization and in terms of the kind of general direction of where they want to invest. So I think that personal reflection is telling of the maturing of the industry. And yeah, that's
Piers, just before you come in, Nicky, I might then ask you to comment on companies, and from a corporate sustainability perspective, how are they seeing and perceiving the change in sustainable finance? But Piers first, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think I thought I was going to make a really good point, and then Rory made it much better than I would have straight away. But I'll have a go at making it anyway, which is I think with the mainstreaming one, which is sustainable finance started as something very, very specialized, and that has changed and ebbed and flowed as it would. But actually, I think really what we're seeing is not sustainable finance changing, just broadening. And there are now jobs which really wouldn't have existed 10 years ago. Chevron has a director of sustainability. And while I don't think anyone's going to argue that's the most sustainable job in the world, it does have a potential to effect a huge amount of change. And so with the broadening has come a need for it to fit into lots of different areas that it maybe didn't have to in the past, and that's required from changes. The regulation has created a lot of change, and just I think generally generally people's thinking has advanced a real long way. So there's now an ability for sustainability to be a much more routine consideration in lots of different jobs with a primary purpose, and then sustainability as a secondary one. And that's, I think, good news, because it's really broadened the opportunity set that's available to different people and different skills. And as someone mentioned, the US political backlash, so I feel like now I have to bite that hook, which is my sort of hot take there is that I think it will probably make the sustainable finance movement stronger for it. We were very fortunate to swim along with the current of fashion on sustainability, and now we're having to swim against it a little bit in certain markets, but we'll be stronger swimmers for it. So I think we'll end up in a better position, more thoughtful, and are more tied to mission, rather than having to change a mission, work out how sustainability improves our existing one under law and so on. So, I think a lot of these things aren't to be seen as challenges or setbacks, but really opportunities to make what we do more reasoned and more impactful eventually.
Thanks, Piers. Nicky, and then Rob, if you want to come in on this question. So Nicky first, maybe on the corporate sustainability investor nexus.
Sure. So my background is in corporate sustainability. I led the Body Shops program for more than 10 years. And that's a profession that is now 20 years old. It is a mature profession, but it is constantly having to evolve. I think the difference that I'm seeing today is that whereas corporate sustainability and sustainable finance were very much two tracks on a line and working and existing almost in parallel to one another, we're seeing, and can expect to see much more integration between those two professions going forward. I mean, we see it in the recruitment, of course. There's a lot of crossover between corporate backgrounds being recruited into sustainable finance and vice versa. But, I think we've got regulation that is actually facilitating that integration. Corporate sustainability professionals and sustainable finance professionals are speaking the same language. They're working to the same frameworks. They're trying to standardize, how you both, manage and report and drive change in a consistent manner. So I think there's a lot more, proper integration now. And we could expect that to, only deepen with the introduction of CSRD and other regulations that is bringing corporate sustainability reporting and disclosure, much closer to the EU taxonomy. So, I think it's there's a huge opportunity now to really, optimize that integration between those two professions.
Thank you, Nick. And Rob, did you have any comments on that before we move to wrapping up?
Yeah, I'll just make one quick one. So I think in our work, year on year, we're seeing the projects become increasingly kind of complex as our clients are integrating all of this sustainability stuff into the different aspects of the business that they do. And like Piers is saying, the investment teams quite often are just doing sustainability rather than having a sustainability team telling them what to do. However, I think there is still a role for those kind of ESG specialists to help those individuals or those different business functions to interpret what they're kind of being told by voluntary guidance or by recommendations or by clients. So yes, I think all of those companies and organizations are becoming more integrated and doing it all more day to day, but that role of an ESG specialist is still very relevant, which is what existed before. So I don't think those roles aren't disappearing anytime soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. So one last question that I'd like to ask everybody. I'll start with you, Ash, which is, what is the one bit of advice? So one bit of advice, everybody, and no sort of and supplemental clauses. So what's the one bit of advice you give to today's audience, which is mainly, I think, comprised of undergrads, postgrads, and early career professionals, about a career in sustainable finance? Ash.
Can you come back to me, Rory? I need to articulate this so that it's
okay.
To the point.
Take your time. Rob, are you ready to go?
Yeah. So I think it's quite a vocational role. You've got to want to do this. So do just spend a bit of time thinking about what kind of work you enjoy doing, what kind of work you think you're good at, and what kind of environment you want to work in. Like as the industry is getting bigger, there are more and more types of organisations that are involved in sustainable finance. So there's lots of opportunity for you to get in the right environment and be doing the type of work that suits you.
Thank you, Rob. Nicky?
Be very, do your research, go in with your eyes open, be aware of what kind of an industry it is. I mean, it is a richly rewarding career and a profession, but it's not for everyone. So, do go in having done some homework, ask the questions, speak to people who are in the profession already, and really get a sense of, is this where I see myself? Hopefully you will see that, but be prepared to go in with your eyes open.
Good. Olga?
Probably has come across today, it's such a dynamic field. So I'd just say be adaptable. And, if you don't end up in the perfect role, be adaptable and see what you can get from that, which you can transfer on at a later time. And in the role you're in, be as adaptable as possible, because it will shift and change all over the place and you never know what you're going to get.
Thank you. Piers?
Yes. So I got given a really good piece of advice by a corporate defense attorney, which was ideally you want to be interesting and relevant, but if you can only be one, be interesting. So don't be afraid about skills not necessarily matching. That's why we took the degree requirement off our job, is because we thought that people could do all kinds of interesting things. But Rob, I think, made the most important point, which is as this field is kind of bigger, there's so many different options available. You can work much more into NGO style work, really pushing the envelope forward, or you can work in a much bigger institution where you're going to have to compromise on perhaps a lot of what you think is maybe the most right thing to do, but you are going to move huge amounts of capital in doing it. So having a sense of where you want to start is on that spectrum is going to really help set you up for success and stay motivated. And you can always change later on, but that's going to be a really big decision, because if you go into the wrong bit, it's going to be a struggle. And if you go in the right bit, it's just going to lift you up.
Thank you, Piers. And Ash?
Yes, ready now. I think this is just more broader piece of advice, but communication is, the ability to communicate with a diverse audience, the ability to integrate diverse views. I think it's so important in the sustainability space. It's one thing to have a passion and it's one thing to have a strong view about something, but the ability to listen to other people who may not share the same views of you and integrate them into your own kind of perception and your own way forward is so important, because I think if you go headstrong about one thing and refuse to change your opinion, I don't think we're going to shift the dial forward, and there's not one right way to do things. So I think finessing your communication skills is going to be vital if you want to kind of pursue a career in sustainable finance or sustainability more broadly.
Thank you, Ash. And I'm now going to paraphrase my mother, whose one bit of advice to me is always say thank you. So thank you to the panel. And Nicky, I'm going to hand back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, again, thanks to the panel, to Ash, Olga, Piers and Rob. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. We hope it's been insightful. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I hope you've learned something and that you feel inspired at least to explore whether a career in sustainable finance is for you. Please do, if you haven't done so already, please use the link on the slide here to download a copy of the careers guide. And if you have further questions, and we expect you will have, then do please contact us at Chronos Sustainability on the email address that you see on the slide here or via our website. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I wish you a very good rest of day. Goodbye.